All right, having some difficulties there. Welcome to the CFB Super Show, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, a.k.a. Dub Deuces85, joined by my man, Jake Kucheck. A special Friday night edition of the Super Show. We had Halloween yesterday, and with kids, it just wouldn't be possible. I've done it before, but the older I get and the later it gets, the harder it becomes for me to try to do the shows on Halloween. We are breaking down the Week 10 slate. Yes, it is Week 10, if you can believe it. A 12-game slate on DraftKings will be our primary focus. We'll also be talking about PrizePicks, Underdog, and any betting opportunities as well. Before we get into that, please make sure if you're watching on YouTube to slap that like button. Make sure that you help us out with that. And over on X/Twitter by reposting and commenting there as well. All those interactions help us a tremendous amount. Jake, it was a pretty decent week 9 for us overall. I know you did pretty well. Betting went well. Everything starting to come together here as we have data. College basketball right around the corner, like literally 2 days from now, 2 to 3 days from now. So we're gearing up for that. But college football is feeling pretty good right now. How'd you do in week 9?
Season overall, well, not probably. It very, very much was best week of the season, both from a betting and DFS perspective. The one thorn on my side, and kudos to you, by the way. I was not necessarily like gung-ho on the Minnesota passing game all week, and some discussion back and forth on the Super Show and then also in the Discord got me onto the Brosmer Jackson combo that took us to 1% finishes across the board. So I was pretty happy about that, and then rode the Vandy plus the points to quite a bit of money on the betting side. They didn't need anywhere near 17 points, so that one worked out pretty well too. Didn't do quite as well as I'd hoped on the late slate. I did not have enough Jarquez Hunter. Absolutely went bonkers, and that was not a game that I was focused on necessarily. So, we didn't get the swept it from wire to wire throughout the day, but we did have a very good day nonetheless.
Yeah, that was the Jarquez Hunter game that I've been waiting for. I got him in best ball and season long, and he's just kind of been, treading water. But that was one hell of a game for sure. And Minnesota, didn't expect them to pass that much, but I think at this point we've identified Maryland as one of the best passing DVPs to target against. So we'll continue to do so whenever they are on the slate. If you're watching live, please communicate with us, chat, comments, questions, concerns, any of that. We'll post it as we go and answer any of those that you have. And one free NFL pick / question per show is the rule. So if you pop in here thinking we're an NFL show, that's what we'll give you. All right, let's start off with this first game here. We had a little bit of Service Academy action last week with Notre Dame on the slate facing a team that in Navy that was looking, pretty hot coming in, but they got a bit humbled. Now we've got Air Force, a lowly Service Academy team, but shout out to Air Force nonetheless, taking on Army, a team with playoff aspirations, a total of 41, and Army favored by 21.5 as it stands right now. And there's a mega chalk quarterback that everybody's going to have in this game. Take it away, my friend. Let's do it.
Yeah, man. So it's always kind of interesting, the irony in Air Force being mainly a running team. And Quentin Hayes, that's the quarterback you were talking about, right? Chalk quarterback Quentin Hayes on this slate. That's what we're going for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tough to get to too much from the Air Force side. If you do think that they're going to keep it competitive, I can't see any way but some long runs from Quentin Hayes. So I do say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but if you're thinking of game stacking, there's a $4,700 quarterback on the other side of this one. That said, the real play from this game, Bryson Daly put up a 60 burger last week, against East Carolina. 5 rushing touchdowns, 31 carries. This is ridiculous. 31 carries. I mean, the guy's got to be pretty beat up, but he's at West Point, man. He can take the beating, right? So, and he's not entirely like just always a rusher. I mean, we haven't seen him throw it that much. He did throw it 10 times last week, but it isn't like the Army offense of old where the forward pass was just completely not a thing. It is enough of a threat that they can't, throw 9 men in the box every single play, and there is room for him to run. 9,200, it is kind of a, like, you have to think about it a little bit price, but the volume is just so high for Bryson Daly. He is, what makes that offense click. There are some other pieces. Obviously we're mainly going to focus on running backs. Kanye Udo has also been there of late, has had some touchdown equity of late. And so, if you want to get off of the Bryson Daly chalk, at 5,500, he does take up a running back slot. And so, it's, if you think that it's going to go mainly to him and not Bryson Daly, you'll probably be way ahead of the field on Udo and way ahead of the field on the points that missed for Bryson Daly. But man, yeah, tough sledding on fading Bryson Daly. The one thing I'll say is in these Service Academy games, they obviously prepare for this type of offense on a weekly basis in practice. And so the offense knows that too. And we might see some extra wrinkles and some trick plays. We might see some, wide receiver reverse passes type thing where you have a wide receiver throwing to a running back or a running back throwing to a wide receiver, and somehow the touchdown avoids Bryson Daly one way or another. So be cognizant of that, but man, yeah, this is a really good spot for him. And I'd also expect that Army has the ball a lot, and I'm not worried about them taking him off the field, even if they get up big by 3 scores or taking their foot off the gas, because he is the gas. He's everything that makes this offense click. So it's not like a situation where you have a Cam Ward who already threw for 300 yards but didn't get any touchdowns. Not that I'm calling out Cam Ward specifically, but I think there will be opportunity for Bryson Daly to add to his scoring total throughout, and very much on that train with sprinkles of other pieces of the Army offense.
Yeah, and Terrell Robinson is he came back in there in week 8, got a nice little 23-yard carry that he broke out. Remember, he used to do some quarterbacking for Army, so perhaps if you're looking for that daily fade, maybe Robinson gets some extra carries. I'm kind of interested in Casey Reynolds at 3.9 as a receiver. Like, Army's doing a little bit of what Navy's doing with this, spread variation of the triple option. So Reynolds is, 1 to 2 receptions a game, but he's hitting home runs with those receptions and get you 15 fantasy points at 3.9. So there's definitely a lot to like on the Army side here. All right, moving on, we have Memphis versus UTSA. Total of 61, highest on the slate. Memphis 7-point favorites. Nice thing about this game, it sets up almost identical to the North Texas game in Tulane last week, which we kept seeing a lot of ownership trending way low on them. A lot of those guys ended up hitting like 20 to 25%. I think people started to come to their senses before we got there. It's a hell of a game. And I think this one definitely sets up very similar. Memphis, a team that defensively has been falling apart over the last few weeks. Teams are just putting up a ton of points against them. And then UTSA defensively, they've been porous all season long. Starting off, you have Seth Hennigan at 7.6. Feels like he's been there for 17 years. Everyone he talked to is, always says to me, Seth Hennigan still goes there. A very potent quarterback passing wise throughout the course of his career. This year, he hasn't really had to show that as much. They've been in some shootouts, but a lot of the games that, USF, Middle Tennessee, these type of wins, they've just relied on the running game and they haven't had to pass a ton. And when you've seen when he had to pass, like against Navy, where they gave up 56, he scored 30 fantasy points. The Charlotte game, which Really shouldn't have been close. He did throw over 200 yards and a couple of touchdowns, but he got sacked a bunch of times. And then the North Texas game, which ended up shooting out, he put up another 27. So he's capable at the 7-6 in this matchup of throwing 30 plus times, hitting 300 yards, a couple of touchdowns, but nobody's going to roster him because another chalky play in this slate, all the best plays when they're chalk, it's usually like, okay, we're trying to find angles, but the way the lineup builds this week, it just seems like it's too easy to play these popular guys. And I don't see a lot of upside to fading them. And one of those is Mario Anderson, who sits there at 7-8, 32 carries in that game against Charlotte. He had 22 against North Texas. That was that huge shootout game. He scored 4 times, 183 yards. The nice thing about Mario is he contributes 3 to 5 receptions pretty much every single game. We can get that Desmond Reed aspect to our running backs who catch passes. It just gives them such a higher ceiling. And Mario really doesn't have a lot of letdowns. You throw out that week 7 game, 4 of his last 5, he's been well over 25 fantasy points. UTSA defensively, they have been so bad against the pass that we haven't seen a ton of running backs put up huge numbers on them, but that doesn't mean that won't happen here with Mario. So I'm very comfortable with him, especially the fact that he's going to get 20, 25 touches at minimum. But knowing he's going to be popular with Daly, you can go that route with Seth Hennigan and some of his receivers. Rock Taylor's the most expensive at 6'3". I do see some of the ownership pointing his direction. Demir Blancomsey at 6K, Kobe Drake 3.5, and then the tight end Anthony Landfear at 3.4. Those are your 4 primary options. Taylor leads the team in targets with 60, and then you have Blancomsey with 46. Those two guys have been the number 1 and 2 options for this team for the past couple of seasons. Rock is the one that I think most people would look to, has the better combination of floor to ceiling. He doesn't have too many bottom out games where Demir does have some down games, but he's also got major upside, but you're not getting a huge discount there. So I would prefer the 300 more for Rock if you can get there. And if you want some touchdown equity, cheap value, Landfear at tight end spot there is where you can go. He's had a pretty uneven season, but he did have 3 for 41 against Charlotte, 6 for 64 back in week 7. And then in week 5, he had 4 for 32. So anywhere between 7 and 10 fantasy points at that 3-4, you're feeling pretty good for the most part. I do think it'll be a pretty high scoring slate, so that might not be enough in tournaments, but in your single entry stuff, that would be fine. On the UTSA side, gone are the days of Frank Harris set like 18 different program records. Owen McCowan has done fine. He's, stepping into the shoes of Frank Harris is always going to look a little bit lackluster. But if you go through his logs and see the way he's been playing, he has been very good. And for a quarterback priced at only 6'1", I almost feel like he's getting a little bit overlooked because the 2 quarterbacks on the slate, Daly, who you just talked about, and Rocco Becht, who you're going to talk about here soon, are just so easy to plug in for everybody that guys like Owen McCowan, who would normally be really major plays for us and the industry, are just going to end up being under 20%. 40 plus pass attempts in 4 straight games. The Tulsa game was awesome. Went back and watched some of that. They lost 45-46, but 30 of his 50 attempts, 434 yards, 4 touchdowns. He also got sacked a bunch of times, but that's okay. We don't care about that. He put up 35 just passing the football. Definitely has the upside for 400 here. Memphis, like I said, defensively, they've completely fallen apart. The 61 total might seem high, but I think we're headed for 70 here. At running back, we do have a question there in the chat about cheap running backs, one of them being Robert Henry for UTSA. Rocco Griffin and Kavorian Barnes have been on this team for a few seasons now, and they've kind of taken turns being the lead back. But this year, especially the last 3 to 4 weeks, Robert Henry has kind of seized control of that lead back spot. He's not terribly efficient. Against Tulsa, he had 20 carries, 67 yards, but he did put up 19, 4 receptions for 22 yards. Another running back that catches passes. Gotta like that. Has touchdown equity, but his YPC, like I mentioned, is very low, not a very efficient guy. But if he's going to be pushing towards 20 touches, kind of Rocket Sanders-esque, no disrespect to Rocket, but, 20 carries for 88 yards and 3 touchdowns would certainly get the job done if he did that at 4K, and it's totally possible. So to answer your question there about Hansen versus Henry, Carson Hansen for Iowa State is pretty banged up right now. And I think Jake's in agreement. We're kind of staying away from Iowa State running backs for now. So Henry, definitely. And then at the wide receiver spot, the receiver room is very banged up. There's several teams at this point in the season that just have injuries galore. DeCorian Clark, who is part of that amazing So he's out for the season. Unfortunately, that's how his career will end. The WR1 on the team currently is Devin McCune, who leads the team in targets. Pull that back up with 52, but he's very banged up right now as well. Basically, the thought is that he's going to warm up and try to go. So we're going to see some warm ups there, but it sounds to me like there's a very good chance he doesn't. We also have several other guys like Oscar Cardenas, who's been around for a long time, dealing with he's actually out for the season. Sorry, he's dealing with the knee issue. As of yesterday, it wasn't out for the season, but I just saw the note that as of today, he is out. So that's another person out for UTSA. So I have my Dalton Carnes play, who did okay. We almost had a touchdown for Carnes last week. He didn't knock it out of the park like we wanted because Ward came back. But Chris Carpenter at 3.7K. I'm happy to say that I'm looking around at some aggregate ownership because we have it later in the week since the show's tonight instead of yesterday. Carpenter's not coming up on a lot of lists. The last 2 games, he's been outstanding. 7 for 115 and a touchdown. He even took a 14-yard carry against Tulsa. Week before that against FAU, 6 catches for 58 yards, and he has been very, very good. Worked his way up to 3rd on the team in targets with 47, 32 catches for 354 and a touchdown, but a lot of that has been over the last 2 to 3 games, and he's had 21 targets over those last 2. So he's becoming the number 1 option out of necessity just because of all the injuries that UTSA has. So at 3.7, he's definitely my favorite value, and 2nd week in a row that we have a guy under 4K that it's speculative to a degree, but it's also very, very safe, especially if Devin McCune can't go. But with the Cardenas news now, even if McCune plays, there's still going to be plenty of targets there for Carpenter to have. So a stack of this game, sure. Passing on the UTSA side, Mario Anderson on the other, but knowing how popular that could be, Seth Hennigan makes sense as a large field GPP option. You have anything you want to add there before we move on?
No, I think hit the nail on the head, which is what you do as a carpenter. So that worked out really well. 3,700 for a high volume receiver. I really like that play.
A drum for the dad jokes. All right, moving on. We're going to go to Ole Miss versus Arkansas. An interesting game, total of 54. Ole Miss just 7-point favorites. Arkansas, some intrigue in the running back room, perhaps. Matchup sucks. Curious to see your thoughts on this one. Let's hear it.
Yeah, Arkansas went bonkers against Mississippi State, as most teams have. Up 58 points, and the guy that I believe you're referencing, Braylon Russell, is another answer to who's a cheap running back that we might be able to use on this slate. So he did not take over the backfield, in its entirety, the way that didn't get 20 carries the way that we might see from a healthy Jaquindon Jackson. But this may have been blowout related, but he did get 16 as compared to only 11 for Rashad Dubinion. Both of those guys are priced down in the 3s, 3,500 for Braylon Russell, true freshman, and 3,700 for Dubinion. So this is not a game that we expect to blow out in favor of Arkansas. However, I do think that they will be interested in controlling the clock and controlling the flow of the game via heavy doses of the run game. Now, the question is, are they going to let Taylon Green rip on the ground as he has successfully and time and time again, or are they going to hand off to one of those 2 backs? And so any of those 3, I think, are viable between Taylon Green and the running backs. The difference is Green priced at 7,500, which is more or less, a market price. I don't think we're getting any significant discount on Taylon Green relative to his matchup, whereas the 2 backs being in the 3K range, 35 and 3,700, if either of them get substantive volume, 15 plus carries, or they both might get 15 plus carries. It's a really good spot to pay off that value. So could be looking at a 100-yard score, maybe multiple score kind of game for one of those 2 backs. I probably lean Braylon Russell just because I think there's a lot of juice there, and I think there's some opportunity to break some long ones. But the reality is, it's up to the coaching staff for Arkansas how they want to divvy up those carries. And it remains to be seen, but definitely want to have exposure to both of those guys. In the passing game, obviously we know by now Andrew Armstrong is the alpha in that room. He's priced okay. I don't think 6,600 is too much. I don't think we're getting too much of a discount either. We are getting a discount on Luke Haas, who was the hero back in week 2 against Oklahoma State, caught us a touchdown then. Doesn't get a ton of volume, but he did go 459-2 against Mississippi State. That was against Mississippi State, so different story here against Ole Miss. But I think that at 3,300, even if we only get one of those scores, or we don't get to 60 yards, but we get in the end zone, I think we're still in pretty good shape at 3,300. So definitely some spots on the Arkansas side. Taylor Green does like to spread it out. It's not like we're going to see – I guess Andrew Armstrong could go for like 8 catches or something, but we won't see Brennan Presley volume out of anybody on this Arkansas team. They just, number one, don't throw it enough, and 2, spread it out when they do. On the Ole Miss side, I just can't ever seem to get quite up to Jackson Dart, especially, in a situation like this where Daly is 100 less. If you want to go real low owned, I think you'd have an opportunity to get a low owned Jackson Dart playing on the road as one of the most expensive quarterbacks on the slate. I don't know that I'm necessarily get there, but it is something that could be in consideration. I got a little bit off the rails with the Ulysses Bentley call last week. Henry Parrish was not as banged up as he apparently had been referenced. He got 15 carries. He got 2 catches, which is, as much volume as we typically would expect from him. So we did not see increased volume from Ulysses Bentley, as I alluded to possibly seeing. That game also stayed a lot more competitive for a lot longer than we expected it to. So maybe that had something to do with the lack of Ulysses Bentley. What we did see a lot of, and what I think we may see a lot of again, was Caden Prieskorn. They seem to have with Trey Harris out, the Ole Miss coaching staff seemed to be very much interested in getting the ball to tight ends, much to the chagrin of those of us that rostered Caden Lee to a pretty significant degree. That was what kept my 1% entries from being, ship type entries. That I had Caden Lee, who had an okay game, but 50, 60 yards, not getting in the end zone is not usually going to cut it, even at the 3,700 that he was at last week. But Caden Prieskorn down there at 3,300, you could make a double tight end stack in this one and spend a lot of money elsewhere with Prieskorn and Haas both at 3,300. That could get real interesting if you have both of those guys and they both find their way heavily involved into the passing game. And then Jordan Watkins had his typical Jordan Watkins 3 to 5 catches, 40 to 60 yards, not really getting involved in the end zone kind of performance last week, and I would expect more of the same here. Isaiah Satania can be interesting at times. Not a whole lot of other guys that I'm involved with in the passing game on either side, and probably not going to really anyone besides Prieskorn on the Ole Miss side. Whereas the Arkansas side, especially playing at home and going to be chasing some points potentially, I think there's a lot of interest in a lot of different pieces kind of across the board for Arkansas.
Definitely. And I think depending on Trey Harris news there, we could see a elevated ownership once again on Caden Lee. So I do like that Prieskorn look for sure. All right, Duke versus Miami, 54.5 total. Miami 20.5 point favorites. This is a pretty tough spot to get excited about Duke. Malik Murphy had a really nice game last week against SMU, threw 48 times, 295 yards. Put up a pretty solid for him, 26. No rushing upside this year like we thought, but he does come in at 6K, and we'll have to throw the ball a ton. Wouldn't have very much interest in Star Thomas, who we've seen be chalked several times this season. He does get the volume for Duke, and he gets double-digit fantasy points because of that volume, but he's not a terribly efficient play by any means. And with the Duke receivers, it's been this way for years, it feels like. It's just hard to really peg where those game-to-game targets are going to come from. Overall, Jordan Moore and Eli Pankel are the top two receivers target-wise, and Moore comes in at 5.7, 4.5 for Pankel. But again, their game-to-game production really tails off, and Moore had such a hot start to the season. I mean, he had against Elon a 112-yard game, against Northwestern 121 yards, and then he's really kind of tailed off since, and he's failed to register even 30 fantasy points in any of the last 3 games. So while it seems like, yeah, Duke will have to chase points in this one, it's just not a team that I have been very good with over the past couple of years with the receiver group. Like just go to Moore here, and then all of a sudden you're going to have a Samir Hagens game, which he did kind of flash a bit of upside with that 65-yard touchdown against Georgia Tech. But this is just not a very appealing situation for me, even though Miami has looked very beatable, and the whole conspiracy theory of the ACC is making the call to the refs to give them, the undefeated season to get in the playoff. We do have Cam Ward, way too expensive at 10.8. I think he starts back up his 300-yard streak. You called it, with the blowout against FSU, they just didn't need him to do very much. I was hoping with the Heisman, as a Heisman ticket holder, that, he would still have to throw and do some things, because other blowouts, they really leaned on him and let him do some stuff. But, there's been some really close games. The Cal game, Virginia Tech, that they've had to really sweat out. Louisville pushed them late. So it seemed like they were in a situation where they were in the driver's seat. They didn't want to risk any chance of Ward getting hurt, any interceptions, any mistakes, anything like that. So I get why that happened. But I do think Duke is at least adequate enough to force Ward to throw. And the hope would be that he hits 2 to 250 in the first half and then kind of ekes towards 300. He's more of a prop play for me at this point. I'm always hitting his 300-plus passing yards. This was the first time all season it didn't hit last week, so I will be back on that again. But obviously at 10.8, it's going to be very difficult to roster him, and you'll know he's going to be sub 2% owned. So if this does turn into a situation where they struggle again defensively and Duke keeps it close, Ward could put up 40, but it's probably unlikely that that's going to happen. The Miami running game becomes somewhat interesting. We saw Damian Martinez, since they didn't pass it as much, they gave it to the running backs, and Martinez channeled his inner Oregon State self, 148 yards and 2 touchdowns on just 15 carries. Like, that was vintage Damian Martinez that we really haven't seen much this season. We also saw Mark Fletcher. He racked up 71 yards and a touchdown on 15 carries as well. That's actually the 3rd straight game in which he has had double-digit carries and scored over 12 DK points. So Fletcher is really starting to settle into a nice role here. He's priced at 4K. Definitely a value that nobody's going to use, but it almost seems like you're locking in 10 to 12 fantasy points as your floor with that. And that's a pretty nice look, honestly, with some of the bust potential of some of these other values. Martinez is still a little bit too expensive for me at 6.3. If this was an Oregon State situation where we knew he was going to get 30 touches, I would be like, wow, 6.3 is a ridiculously hysterical price. But at the situation with Miami where they're passing a lot, he shares carries with Fletcher. We do see AJ Allen get some carries. We see the youngster Jordan Lyle. Like, there's other guys that are getting touches in this backfield. 15 carries just not enough for me to really trust Damian Martinez. And the receiving room for Miami, when it is cooking, is totally spread out. You have Restrepo as the top dog, 59 targets, but Isaiah Horton has had a monster season, 54 targets for him. Jacoby George, a big play threat. Samuel Brown, both of those guys with 42 targets. The tight end, Elijah Arroyo, there's bagel potential there, but he's so cheap. He has touchdown equity, 16 catches for 310 yards, 4 touchdowns. Really like the weapons that Miami has, but it's going to be hard to pay the price for Restrepo at 7K. There is the priorities of the Iowa State receivers here, not to steal your thunder. And then when you look at the values, it's real nice. Arroyo's 3.1, Brown 3.4, George 4K. Like, those are all really nice price points for them. but they're nothing more than alt GBP looks because George may only get 1 for 10. He could bust out for 6 for 70 and a couple of touchdowns, but are you willing to take that risk in your main lineup? So much variance with those guys? Probably not. But if you're running multiple lineups, then it absolutely makes sense to run multiple Miami stacks because nobody else is going to do that whatsoever. I don't think we'll see much ownership in this game at all. I do see a little bit of love there around the industry for Fletcher because he's cheap and he's kind of guaranteed those looks. But that's the kind of play to me where if he doesn't score, you're looking at like 6. Kind of tough there, but it is a very good DVP spot against Duke's rush defense. So take that for what it's worth. But yes, you. I know you're on this. You used to be a big Cam Ward fan. I know you're just kind of giving him crap because you know I love him, but it's really tough to pay the price for him. And I'd love to see him get back on track here. But this just seems like a game that Miami's just kind of be a little bit listless here. So I don't have a ton of interest. I don't think you probably have any either. So unless you do, we'll go ahead and move on to a more exciting game.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing against Cam Ward. It's where they're pricing, right? Like
it's crazy.
It's really hard for him to get there with his skill set.
Yeah, at almost 11K. I'm just gonna hit his props and hope he gets back on track. All right, Ohio State versus Penn State, 47 total now. I got it on Tuesday at 45. That was when Drew Aller's injury was up in the air. So we got a better number there. Hopefully you guys were able to tell. And Ohio State is 3-point favorites. We were in a great position last week. Pretty much the only ones that rostered Jeremiah Smith. I think it was like 9%. So there's a few other people. But really, really felt good when he had that 60-yard touchdown. But then Ohio State stopped throwing the football. And then they kind of just let Nebraska gash them a bunch. And it was very puzzling. Quite possibly the worst play calling I've ever seen from Ohio State with the current regime. So I'd like to sit here and say bounce back spot here against Penn State, but now I'm a little bit gun shy and he's expensive at 7.5, but I'm going to be real upset if he goes 9 for 203 this week when I needed it last week. So what are you feeling like with this one?
What a disaster. And it's hard to call a win a disaster ever, but one of the worst Ohio State games. Yes, the play calling, but also the execution. Trevion Henderson getting stuffed on 4th down. Just doesn't – the stuff that shouldn't happen ever, but especially not at home against Nebraska is it was just weird. And sometimes football is weird. And sometimes, I don't know, maybe they all had the flu or something, or the whole O-line had the flu and they couldn't get any push and just nobody heard about it ever. Sometimes ball doesn't bounce your way. And so I think we can chalk it up to that because we've seen Ohio State play at a pretty high level, pretty consistently. To have a clunker and still come away with a win, maybe it's a wake-up call, right? Very speculative stuff here. Don't love this as an overall DFS environment. I'm not looking to take 5 guys from this game in one lineup or anything like that. That said, a way to get way to beat Penn State and a lot of Big Ten secondaries is with a slot receiver. And so, you're on Jeremiah Smith. He had his long 60-yard catch. And I was on him too. He convinced me of, Minnesota passing game, convinced me of Jeremiah Smith, and holy cow, I did pretty well. So appreciate you. I think it's actually going to be Buka this week. I think that they're going to roll a lot of coverage to Jeremiah Smith. I think that we're going to see some shorter passes as an extension of the run game to help open up the run game, help get a little bit lighter boxes for Henderson and Judkins to deal with, and get some quick stuff to get Will Howard in a rhythm because he was so very much not in one a week ago. Only threw 16 passes too. Isn't that just a ridiculously low number for a team that you expect to pretty much have some vertical concepts and be able to do what they want to do. So Buka is the guy that I think can execute that the best. And I think that's where they're going to go. And he's at 6'8", is it? 6'8". And everybody's going to see, like, the DVP, Penn State is tough against the pass. This is Ohio State. Like, when they are attempting to pass, they are typically pretty good at it. They just got to remember to start doing that again. Smith is never a bad play. I think that this is more of a Buka game. And it was nice to see Carnell Tate finally have somewhat of a breakout game. He had a long touchdown as well, 40 yards. He's down there at 3.8. If you think all the attention is focused on Buka and Smith, and Carnell Tate has room to run, he finally proved that he can make a defense pay down the field. So at 3.8, he's of interest as well. Not interested in Will Howard. I probably didn't say that. I thought it, but I feel like that is fairly assumed at most times. And I will say it if I am interested in him. How about that? We'll put it that way. Neither back could really get anything going. Henderson looked particularly awful. I think he may be kind of hurt and they're not talking about it or something. He's just not as explosive as we know he can be. Judkins looked fine. Only 10 carries, didn't really have much room to run, did catch a touchdown, was kind of not really a play designed for him. It was more just he was the guy that did the scramble drill the best and found himself in the end zone. And so, not a lot of necessarily repeatability there. At 7-4, it's quite a bit to commit to when I think that this will be a game that is more focused on getting the passing game into a rhythm. So mainly just Egbuka from the Ohio State side. And even him, I'm not forcing him into lineups. I'm not saying Egbuka is going for 202. I'm saying I think he's probably going to have more than 2 catches. That I feel confident in. And I think the overall offense looks better this week, even against a tougher opponent. You mentioned Drew Aller being banged up. I don't know that I would prefer Drew Aller to be playing if I was holding an over ticket. I think I might prefer another guy playing quarterback back there. But I think they'll probably still go with him anyhow. And so we're not using Drew Aller pretty much ever, certainly not against Ohio State. The running backs could be interesting. We saw Nebraska able to move the ball on the ground probably more than you expected against Ohio State. And Singleton and Allen, obviously both extremely capable backs, very large discrepancy in price, which we don't always see with them. Singleton up near 7K, Allen below 5K. If you wanted to get a little bit weird and use a Penn State running back, I think Allen is very much the right call there, even though I am traditionally a Singleton guy. I think, the discount on Allen is certainly, warrants consideration if you're going that route. Tyler Warren came back down to earth and, was a mere mortal who only caught 7 passes a week ago against Wisconsin after doing anything and everything against USC en route to a 50-point game, which is really tough to do as a tight end. At 7-1, it's a little bit rich for the game environment and the fact that it's Drew Aller throwing passes to him. But, this is a game that Penn State very much wants to win, and I think he will be involved in the game plan. So if you can find your way to 7-1 for a receiver, I don't mind Tyler Warren one bit. Just, go into it with the proper expectations, and that 17 catches might be a lot to expect out of anyone. Harrison Wallace has shown some explosiveness at times. I don't think he necessarily gets there against a, pretty tough exterior secondary for Ohio State. And there's not a whole lot else other than we do need to give an obligatory mention to the existence of a potential Julian Fleming revenge game.
Was wondering if you're going to say that.
And so So as much as the narrative, speaks to us at times, I don't know how involved he's really going to be in the game plan. But if the other 3,300 receivers that we got you in the Ole Miss Arkansas game don't appeal to you, and you would prefer to go with a guy that may want to stick it to a program that never really gave him a shot to succeed, we'll maybe sprinkle some Julian Fleming. Could be interesting. Definitely not forcing it in there. So that's what I got. Overall, not as exciting of a DFS game as a real life game, given the implications in the conference and the playoff, and the head coaches that can't seem to ever win the big one. Someone has to in this one. But yeah, certainly gonna try to watch as much of this one as I can and not be overly DFS exposed to it.
Yeah, it's a good one to bet for sure. Even the total app now is 47, I think still has a solid chance to hit the over. And yeah, glad you called out Fleming there. He's just not had a very good season whatsoever in a Penn State uniform. And then I just wanted to point out just how weird that Ohio State game was and how tilting they threw. You mentioned 16 times and only ran 18 times. So just didn't have the ball like at all. It's like in the perfect position that we were in with Jeremiah Smith. It really was a bottom 1% outcome for us. But I'm scared. I'm scared of fading it.
And he still got 70 yards and a touchdown. Like the bottom 1% outcome was still pretty okay.
It just seemed like we were on our way to like one of those, Jameson Williams style games, but it's all good. It was still fine. All right, moving on here. We're going to talk about Minnesota versus Illinois. Total of 46. Gophers come in as a road favorite, 3-point favorites. Minnesota threw the football a lot. The DVP wise, Texas Tech, one of the worst pass defenses, which you're going to talk about, but Maryland, people are figuring out they can't stop the pass either. And for the first time in, I think, history, Brosmer did throw 37 times against UCLA, but the game against Maryland, like, they just threw and threw and threw and didn't stop. 4 touchdown passes, 320 yards for Max Brosmer. I can't think of a single other Minnesota quarterback performance in the last, maybe decade that was that good. It was just such a huge, huge showing, and it has pretty much solidified anytime Maryland's on the slate, everybody's just going to play the quarterback against them. Priced up to 6K now, much tougher matchup against Illinois. I don't like him to throw 30 plus this time, even though he's done, 4 of his last 5, he's been over 30. I think they do need to get Darius Taylor much more involved here and just their running game in general, which is kind of funny to say about a Minnesota team. If you want to ride the wave as he's been playing pretty well, you can, but 6K is a cheap price, but I just don't think it's the matchup there. Darius Taylor does check in at 8-4, would be a much more beatable spot for them to run the football against Illinois, just as a kind of soften them up, pound it. I think we see him get 25 to 30 touches. Still pretty efficient outing last week, 22.5 fantasy points, just the 15 carries, 81 yards. Did have 5 receptions. We had mentioned, hey, he's going to have that Desmond Reed-esque game, 5 for 34. It wasn't, 8 for 150 like Reed does, but it still was a lot of passing volume that he got, or receiving volume, I should say. The 8-4 price is more of a luxury plays up there in that Taj Brooks luxury range. But if you end up having that price point, you got a player, that you're looking for, you got all this value, who can you pay up for? Darius Taylor is certainly a guy that you can do that with. And then you have in the receiver room, Daniel Jackson, who the Javian Thomas, Jaden Ott news last week for Cal. Ott ends up warming up and playing. Thomas, I ended up swapping from him to Daniel Jackson, and that obviously ended up being a home run. 35.5 fantasy points there, 9 for 117 and 2. Second game in a row, he's been over 15 fantasy points, 10 for 89 against UCLA. Again, I think this is one where Minnesota comes back down to earth a little bit passing offense-wise. The Illini's defense, they have a knack for kind of forcing teams into, doing some opposite of what they want to do things. And then offensively, Illinois has a really good position to slow the game down. They have pace certainly when they need to, but they can slow things down too. And if they think Minnesota is suddenly this prolific passing offense, they're going to want to keep the ball out of their hands as much as possible. So I don't know that Minnesota is going to have enough volume in this one to make Jackson pay off his now almost 6K price point from where he was last week at 4.5. I am glad that they priced him up, because if he was 4.6 this week, we'd still have to feel obligated to play him, even though I don't love the spot for him whatsoever. Illinois side, it was 2 weeks ago when I was on my own. I loved Luke Altmaier. Then I think it was the week after when he got you back. You liked Luke Altmaier. He hasn't really done us any favors the last 2 weeks. Oregon roughed him up. He didn't throw for more than just 80 yards against Michigan, even though they did win the game. That Michigan game is what I think we might see here, is like a 14-7, 20-10 type of score, where Illinois just drains things, sucks the life out of the building, and leaves their home field with a win. I think that puts Altmaier somewhere between 15 and 20 fantasy points, which isn't bad at 5.5. I am still waiting for a huge game on a slate. He did have 41 against Purdue, but that wasn't a DFS slate game. And I know he's capable of doing that in a spot here like against Minnesota, but I don't think that I'm confident enough to really pull the trigger on him in a lineup somewhere for a third straight week. So I'm light on Altmaier shares. At the running back spot, the Caden Fegan is basically out long-term. He had to go surgery. They were expecting to get him back once the surgery happened. He's done. So that means Josh McCray will operate as the RB1 the rest of the way. He's priced at 3.7K. We've seen some running backs do fairly well against Minnesota. So I do think with volume, 15 to 18 touches, he pays off that 3.7 pretty easily. And I don't think he's one of those running backs that people are going to be looking to roster. I think the value this week, there's a lot of receivers, some good ones that are cheaper that people are going to be targeting. I think that puts McCray below 10% ownership, and I think that might be a mistake by the masses. Not saying I'm going to end up there myself, but I think it's foolish to completely fade him if you're doing multiple lineups. So keep that in mind for McCray. And then the wide receiver spot, Pat Bryant is questionable. He's going to play still, they say, but I read a report earlier that they're going to check him during warmups, and there's actually a bit of concern that he might not be anywhere close enough to 100% to play more than a decoy spot. So if he does play, don't play him. First of all, he's 6'4", and second of all, I think he's going to just be out there to just run his route, not actually look for a catch. Zachary Franklin is priced at 4.2. We have been pushing him between the two of us for the last couple of weeks now. Didn't do anything against Michigan. Did have 6 for 72 against Oregon last week. I love him in this game. I think at 4.2, he has the ability to take the top off the defense. UTSA used to be one of their best receivers when they had this trio of guys all above 800 yards. He hasn't had that huge explosion game in an Illini uniform just yet. Has a lot of PPR upside, but I think this is finally the game where he breaks one for, 50, 60 yards and a touchdown and really has that huge 8 for 150 and 2 type of game. I think we're finally going to get it from Zachary Franklin. So he is the third receiver that I'm really kind of dialing in as my value piece next to Carpenter, and kind of figuring out where I'm going to pay the rest of those guys. But I'm very high on Zachary Franklin, and I'm actually kind of pot committed because I keep throwing the dart at him week in and week out. And the second I jump off, he's going to blow up. And I think this is a decent enough spot for him to pan out for us. So props, I'm all over him. And then I am DFS wise going to have plenty of Zachary Franklin there. So are you in on Altmaier exposure here once again? Or are you kind of backing off now?
Fool me once, shame on me. Or fool me twice, shame on you. However the saying goes, probably fool me a lot if you go back to Altmaier third time. So yeah, probably getting off him here.
Yeah, I just need him to throw like 120 yards and that all to go to Franklin, and I'll be happy. All right, moving on. We have Florida versus Georgia, total of 52. Georgia 14.5 point favorites, and I'm kind of scratching my head like, is Florida a thing now? And because of the week one, everyone was betting Florida over Miami except us, and they got absolutely detonated against. And I'm looking at this game and Georgia's offense, but I'm still seeing a game in which if Florida only loses by 2 touchdowns, I'll be surprised. Maybe you won't, but I will be surprised. So tell us about this one.
So it's a high enough total that like I'm reticent to just like completely dismiss the game as a whole outside of one player, but that's kind of how I'm feeling on this one. I think there will be a lot of Trevor Etienne, and I don't really know that anybody else should get involved to the degree that we should be concerned about him. So another I guess I guess we can be considered very much a revenge spot for him, and he should be getting the ball plenty. Pumped him up to 20 plus touches a few times now, and he was very successful against Texas, and I don't think Florida has anywhere near the kind of front that Texas does, and so. If you can run on Texas, you can run on Bama, you can run on Auburn. I think you can probably run on Florida too. So should be lots of Trevor Etienne. I kind of want to keep an eye on the Florida running back situation just to see how the volume of carries shake out. Not that I necessarily want to use a Montreal Johnson or Jaden Baugh against a Georgia defense by any means, but how impressive was Jaden Baugh against Kentucky. And so, definitely want to monitor that situation. I don't think that we can really get to either of them in this game, certainly not using Lagway. The only spot on the Florida side that you might consider with a run back is Elijah Badger at 4.3. A lot of talent, a lot of volume. He's shown his ability to break big plays even against higher level competition. And if you have an ETN and you want to throw a Badger in there as a run back, I certainly don't hate it, but I'm not going to force it either. Very happy to just take ETN from this one and move on.
Yeah, I will say I usually don't have the benefit of looking at ownership on our Thursday version of the show, but I have looked at it now that we've on Friday night before the slate, and Chimere Dike at 3.6 is pulling a sizable amount, 15 to 18%. And that's where that Carpenter play comes in at 3.7, because I'd personally rather play him than DK. So I'm fine with not having him if he's a chalky value against Georgia. Maybe I'm giving too much respect to this Georgia team, but I just don't see Florida competing very much with them. But I guess that would mean more targets.
I see DK being like a 4 for 47 or something. And
yeah, we can live with fading that for sure.
And maybe even gets in the end zone. That still doesn't kill you, right? So
yeah,
I just like ETN in this one.
Yeah, definitely. He's one of the first running backs I clicked in. He will be popular, but it's one of those plays where we just don't want to get too cute fading. I do like some Georgia receiver unders for what it's worth. We'll get into those at the end, but yeah, move on here to the next one. Arizona versus UCF, 55.5 total. UCF as a 6.5 point favorite. If Arizona was any kind of like consistent, I would be slamming probably outright, honestly, but definitely the plus 6.5. UCF is in rough shape. Gus Malzahn he's on the morphine drip, as they say. Ja'Cory Brown is, we knew it, but I guess he didn't, and their fans didn't know that he was also basically just another variation of KJ Jefferson in the multiverse, a guy that can't pass very well, has a lot of mobility, but when the teams that you're playing figure out you can't pass, they just stack it up and don't allow you to run. And that's what BYU decided to do. Ja'Cory Brown's not going to run the football against us. And he got banged up and had some stuff going on, but overall, he just looked horrible. They turned it over to the youngster Dylan Risk. He's got the Riz, as the kids say. Priced down there at 4.5 if you really want to get cute. Came in, threw 6 of 10 against BYU, 102 yards, 1 touchdown. Also rushed for 31 yards. So, no quarterbacks on Gus, the Gus Bus team could possibly not run the football a lot. So I guess he has that dual threat upside, but he looks like the best passer on the team. And right now, the staff, specifically Gus, is kind of being, a little bit secretive with what they're planning to do. I think he's going to end up playing both, which is obviously, we know, the worst decision possible. If you don't have to play 2 or 3 quarterbacks, you really shouldn't, because it screws up your continuity. We've seen it all the time. I think he's going to probably start Brown, and then he's going to suck in the first 2 drives, and then they're going to go to risk, and he's going to play well. If he starts at 4 or 5, I think he's worth a GPP shot or an afternoon slate build, just because, he's min price. Arizona has proven that they can't hold anyone. So there is upside there for him, and he can, from what I saw, he could throw the football. Granted, very short sample, and it was against BYU's defense. But he already looked like a better passer than Ja'Cory Brown and KJ Jefferson combined. And I don't want to dog on KJ Jefferson. We've won money with him in the past, but these guys just can't throw the football. Their offense is in rough shape. The receiver room, you got guys leaving early, transferring out. Kobe Hudson, really the only capable, viable, guy with a pulse to catch passes, but the quarterback play is ruining him. He's all the way down to 4.7 for Kobe Hudson. He was priced at damn near 8K there at some points earlier in the season. Is dealing with a leg issue that knocked him out of a lot of the BYU game. He's claiming he's going to play. I haven't seen the clear definition or designation from the coaches yet. Players always say they're going to play. We'll see what happens. He's very tempting at 4.7 because we know what kind of talent he has. And the guy could put up 30. We saw him do it against Cincinnati. But that quarterback play is just really hampering him. If Risk were to start, I think I'd have a little bit interest there to maybe throw Hudson into the main lineup. I don't know if I'll actually do that afternoon slate. I'm more apt to do so. But just a situation to monitor. With it all everything going on, really the only thing you should do if you're going to use UCF players is play RJ Harvey. And I don't think I'll be able to get there at 9.3. I'm certainly worried about it. I designate him as a luxury play. I do think he'll end up seeing 25 to maybe 30% of the rostership. Which is good because that means the Iowa State situation will be lower. Some of the other guys we like, ETN, maybe not be 70% owned or something stupid. But Harvey is their entire offense. They're going to have to give him 20 plus touches at minimum, whether that's targets or carries. He was actually really efficient against BYU, only 16 carries but 127 yards, scored a couple of touchdowns. His prop for 2+ touchdowns is usually a good bet. I think he definitely scores here against Arizona and has upside to do some damage as a receiver because of UCF being so injured. But that 9.3 price point, generally, if you're not starting with him, it's harder to be like, hey, I've got 9.3 left for a running back. Like you don't really have a lineup that happens. So you really have to make the decision at the beginning if you're going to play him or not. On the other side, Noah Fifita is a bit expensive for my taste at 8.3. He is a boom or bust extraordinaire. In the offseason, I took that Heisman future on Ward, and then there was one other player. It was Noah Fifita, which I knew was going to be a total long shot, but that's why I did it. After that first game, I thought, holy hell, this could have a chance, but that has gone by the wayside. Just not a lot of accuracy and consistency. He can throw a deep ball, and all you have to really do is get it within a couple yards of T-Mac, and he'll make the play for you. But we just see the inaccurate throw of Fifita, underthrowing receivers, overthrowing them, throwing to the wrong team. So it's pretty difficult to want to roll him out there at 8.3. And UCF defensively, they've actually been pretty decent at limiting opposing quarterbacks. We were all in on Sorsby that time, a couple of other players, and they're just not necessarily the biggest DFS target in the world. On paper, it looks like it, but a lot of that was from the earlier part of the season. Running back, we got all the Quali Conley at 6'4" if you want it. UCF's rush defense has been pretty solid. Conley's more of a receiver, and we had that with him at San Jose State. When you're using him, and he was a lot cheaper than 3.5, 4K. Using him, you're expecting those receptions. And at those prices, you can get away with 50 rushing yards because the receiving work is going to do the rest. But at 6'4", 7K, you really need to see him pushing towards 100 yards more often. That's just not happening. So I do see people using him and some chatter about him, but he's pretty low on the totem pole for me this week. And then you have value in the receiving room, the tight end, Kean Burnett, and then you have Montana, Lamonius Gregg. But really the decision, do you want to pay almost 9K for a receiver? And if so, do you want to do that for Tedoroya McMillan, affectionately known as T-Mac? because of the inconsistent play of Fifita, it really hampers T-Mac at times. They were on point against West Virginia. He had that 10 for 202 and a touchdown, put up 40. If he does that here at 9K, that's a huge score. It's going to be hard to make up those points. Had 70 against New Mexico in week 1. But you've seen a lot of 26, 12, 25, 11, had only the 9 against Colorado. So I think you can get away with fading him. If you're paying up that price, you're generally going to want to go to a running back that you know are going to get those guaranteed touches because they're not at the mercy of the quarterback playing well. They're going to get those touches regardless. T-Mac, he's got to rely on Fifita being able to throw the ball today. Can he or can't he? So, great GPP look paying up because I don't expect him to carry much rostership. His props are always fun to look at, but overall, I think I'm pretty low on Arizona compared to the field. It would just be a decision for me if I want to pay up for RJ Harvey or not. And at this point, I don't think I do. And with this game being, pushing towards a 60 total, it's definitely worrisome for me. But I think it could turn out like the Colorado-Arizona game where it was like 21-7, low scoring, low output, not a lot of fantasy goodness. I do think that something similar could happen here, even though on paper, the matchup against UCF is very, very good. I think it's fool's gold for the most part. All right, let's move on to one of the crown jewels of the slate, Texas Tech versus Iowa State. Total of 56.5, certainly be more than that. 13.5 point favorites are the Cyclones. There's a lot to like here. Lay it on us, brother.
Yeah. So first thing, got to acknowledge Taj Brooks is just such a beast, man. Just so consistent, such heavy volume, hardly comes off the field, hardly needs a break. And it's just such a fun running back to follow and get behind and root for. And he's not priced in the 9s. He's only at 8.2. So you're getting, RJ Harvey type workload for $1,000 discount. It is pretty compelling, even against, what is kind of historically a tough Iowa State defense. However, they did just happen to let RJ Harvey go absolutely bonkers for 25, 196, and 2. And so you give Taj Brooks that same volume, could be a pretty big day for Taj Brooks. So I do very much like him on that side, in the running game. I don't love Baron Morton ever. There are spots. Last week was actually a spot that I was kind of interested in Baron Morton. Didn't get to him and worked out well that I didn't because he got hurt, didn't finish the game. Should be good to go for this one. But I think what he's going to mainly do is hand off to Taj Brooks. And so I don't really want to put a lot of effort into him, and not going to get to him even at the lower price point. That said, Caleb Douglas has been extremely impressive. 9 catches each of the last 2 weeks, 99 and 3 a couple weeks ago. 140, didn't get into the end zone against TCU, but the volume has absolutely been there, has shown some good chemistry with Baron Morton. And even when Will Hammond came in as a backup, he didn't miss a beat. So Caleb Douglas seems to me like he's kind of taken over the alpha role from Josh Kelly. And, at least in terms of the volume, he's been able to do that. And is significantly lower priced at only 4.8 as opposed to Josh Kelly at 6.2. And then we've seen Kobe Eakin start to get a little bit more involved. He's down at 4.1. So, I think I still am going Douglas at that kind of middle of the road pricing. So definitely like both Taj Brooks and Douglas on the Texas Tech side. And then on the Iowa State side, love Rocco Becht, 6,500. Him and Baron Morton being the same price just doesn't feel right. We saw TCU just basically get whatever they wanted in all aspects of the game, really, against this Texas Tech defense. And Iowa State playing at home has shown the ability to put up a ton of points. Rocco Becht has run the ball a ton. 20 carries for 97 and 2 against UCF. Could be another spot where we want to get back to him, especially with some of those more expensive plays we want to get to. You mentioned T-Mac. If you wanted to get to like a Harvey and T-Mac stack, you need to be able to save some money in other places, and Rocco Becht is usually one of those guys that will allow you to do that. Iowa State running backs have been frustrating, to say the least. Every time we think we have it nailed down, they switch it up, or do they make Rocco Becht the running back for whatever reason? And so a 4-1 Carson Hansen, even though he's coming off an injury, would typically be interesting. I don't know that I trust how the carries will be divvied up enough to have a ton of exposure to any of them. Carson Hansen is probably the one that I would be the most interested in, but that most still tops out at like a 15 to 20% exposure. I don't know that I can get too much more than that, given how I think the game will go and that it'll ultimately be in the hands of Beck to do damage. Jalen Jackson had essentially one good week and has otherwise been a DFS afterthought. Abu Sama, who we kind of thought going into the season, this would be his backfield. He hasn't shown the same explosiveness. Really only had the one game against Houston where he did any damage at all, going for 100 yards and a touchdown. And that, of course, was against Houston.
He needs it to snow. He needs a snow game again.
Correct. Yes. Snow. Iowa State versus what was it, K-State in the snow. Yes, we are all over Abu Sama in that game. Apparently, I don't know where he's from originally. Maybe it snows there, and he likes that. I don't know. But yeah, we'll still work on figuring out this Iowa State game. We'll watch that closely. Maybe we'll get some edge to develop finally. Passing game a little bit easier. Jaden Higgins and Jalen Hill. That's pretty much it. So pair Becht with one of those, pair Becht with both of those. Do whatever you like. Run Becht naked, but get some exposure to this Iowa State passing game because they're going to be able to do a lot of fun stuff, especially playing at home. And should have the ball a decent amount in this one, and there should be some fireworks. So, yes, definitely like this game, and the pieces kind of fit together pretty well with liking the passing side on one, and liking the running back Todd Brooks on the other. So, like a lot of this game, get exposure to it. I'm into it.
For sure, yeah. I mean, Sawyer Robertson and went off on them. I mean, the list goes on. Texas Tech defense, like Rocco Becht should have a monster game. He's way underpriced. He's like over 10K on FanDuel too. So they got it right clearly, and DK didn't. So expect him to be chalky, but very good chalk once again. All right, Kansas State versus Houston is where we're going to go next. Total of 45.5. Kansas State 13-point road favorites. Starting with the quarterback spot, Avery Johnson, who I feel is a pretty fair price of 8K. It's about where he's been most of the season. Coming into it, mostly seen as a mobile, rushing-oriented quarterback, and he's definitely had some pretty nice moments. Has rushed for over 370 yards, 4 touchdowns, but he's developed week over week as a passer. His accuracy was a little rough against Kansas, but he got it done when he needed to. And he's become more of a reliable passer in that regard, and they haven't had to lean on him as a runner as much. But this matchup against Houston offers him that chance. Now, Houston's been much better over the last couple of games. Still a pretty porous defense and team overall. I don't think we need to go to Johnson as a main team look. But as I build for the afternoon slate, I do find myself kind of gravitating towards him a little bit. I do like the Giddens-Johnson combo, as I typically do. 4 straight games over 220 yards, which for Avery Johnson, that is pretty much a lot of volume when you consider he's generally been in the 150 range in an earlier career. and more of a 100-yard rusher. So he's developed a lot. Definitely like him in that regard. At running back, 7'6", DJ Giddens. The first lineup I built when the slate came out, Etienne, who we talked about, love him. He's a great play, as you mentioned. Then Mario Anderson for Memphis, and then the third one in that kind of similar same range there in the price points is DJ Giddens, who I think kind of a mortal lock for 100 yards against this Houston team. It's hit or miss if he'll actually score because he does still have to contend with Avery Johnson, who's throwing touchdowns in the red zone now. Dylan Edwards exists and does score from time to time, but overall, Giddens, just like from a yardage standpoint and usage, I think he's going to have one of those games where, 20 carries, 125 yards, does find the end zone, and probably contributes a reception or two, which will definitely obliterate his price tag of 7.6. Nice little 30 for him there. So all over Giddens, his prop is like 99.5, 100.5 in most places, have hit the over there. I think this is a really big Giddens game. Edwards has really fallen out in terms of actual carries. They're using him as kind of more of a slot back, more CFL type of thing where he's catching passes, but not really getting as many carries. He did have a 44-yard carry against Kansas, which was really crucial and kind of turned the tide a bit. So definitely a guy that looms to steal work from Giddens, but the volume that Giddens gets just makes him such a strong play. Receivers wise, Johnson loves his tight ends. I don't recommend necessarily using them. Garrett Oakley is good for like one catch a game, and it usually is a touchdown. Braden Lofton was in that role before he got hurt, and we've seen Will Swanson operate in that kind of role. If Oakley was 3K and we had no value, I might say, hey, let's just take his touchdown and get those 7 points and call it good. We don't need to do that because we have some pretty high level value in Carpenter and some place we've talked about there. But I do think Jace Brown at 4.2 deserves consideration. Pretty much a boom or bust type of play, but that price mitigates it. We've seen him hit 17, 33, 4, and 14.5 over his last 4 games. But his targets have been consistent, 5+ in each of those last 4 games. As far as receivers go that aren't tight ends, he's looking Jace Brown's way, and we know he is a big-time home run hitter. Has longs of 42, 50, and 55 over the last month of the season. So he can take the top off of the Houston defense. If you're not playing Giddens, I would probably recommend trying to lean into a play like Jace Brown because they're going to score. I don't see Houston pulling off this home upset, domination type of thing. And I think they caught TCU with their pants down a little bit, and we've seen them just, they got a little bit lucky against Utah because they're facing their third string quarterback, and it's a disaster there for Utah. But the Kansas game, a fully healthy Kansas, they got their just doors blown off, right? So this is going to be a little bit of a tough spot for them. I do kind of like Zion Chris at 4.7 near min price. He rushed for those 97 yards against TCU, 45 against Utah. He does have a fumbling problem, which hurts, and he does have a tendency to get hurt throughout the course of his young career. So he's a little bit difficult to play there. You're using him as an extension of your running backs. He's not going to throw for more than 10 to 12 times. You really got to have him hit the 90+ rushing yards, maybe scores a touchdown. And then at 4.7, he pays the bills for you a little bit there. And I think he can do it in this matchup against Kansas State. They're going to be a little bit one-dimensional, but Kansas State does have a defense that's opportunistic while at the same time lazy late in games, and they give up points. So I think Chris can definitely pay that off, and nobody's really going to be looking at him. Running backs are easy. No, don't need to talk about them at all. And then for the receivers, because they don't pass the ball very often, can't really use them. They're cheap. Joseph Manjack, we know he can play. Stephen Johnson, he's actually my favorite there at 3.6 if you did want one. Perhaps catches a touchdown or gets a long pass like he did against Utah. But again, 3.7, I'm going to keep going back to Carpenter, who I love. The industry seems to love Chimere Dike at 3.6. Not a lot of room for us to play at 3.6 Stephen Johnson. So Chris for the Houston side, Avery Johnson, DJ Giddens, and Jace Brown for the Kansas State side. This is one in the afternoon slate I think I might stack because nobody's really going to be looking to that with some of these other options here, mainly the Texas Tech, Iowa State stack and the Trevor Etienne play. All right, let's move it on here to the Oregon-Michigan game, perhaps one of those real-life battles that we might want to see, but fantasy-wise might be tough. Total of 45, and Oregon 14.5-point favorites, but They're traveling, the dreaded traveling across country. Lucky for them, it is a afternoon game for their body clock, so not quite as bad if it was a 9 a.m. game. What do you think happens here, and who do you like?
Maybe I was a week early on the Oregon upset. I was feeling good about Illinois taking that one, and wasn't the right spot for it. It was in Oregon, and they just kind of dominated that one from wire to wire. Michigan has obviously had a pretty disappointing season, but they're playing at home. It is November. Dylan Gabriel always screws something up at some point. We're waiting for that to happen. It hasn't happened yet. Could we see like an early, pass get tipped and end up in Michigan's hands, and then Michigan gets the ball for like 7 minutes and scores, followed by an Oregon 3 and out, and all of a sudden they're chasing 10 points and things aren't coming to them easy. Could see a lot of that happen. Anything can happen, in Michigan. Tough place to play, and we actually saw some reasonable continuity out of the Michigan offense. Granted, playing Michigan State, but allowed them to get into a little bit of a rhythm. We saw, them do their Alex Orji, whatever you want to call his package. I think we might get into some trouble coming up with a nickname for that one, but he got 60 yards and a touchdown. Different scoring in different various ways, but the real play is Colston Loveland at 667 and 2. The only real weapon in the passing game for Michigan, and it is, I assume, going to be Warren going forward at quarterback. We don't really know on a week-to-week basis what Michigan is going to do based on how they're going to divvy up the snaps at quarterback. But when they are throwing, I assume it's going to be Davis Warren going forward, and he seemed to have some extremely good chemistry with Colston Loveland, and I think we do see more of that this week. And if Oregon does go up, we'll see even more passing. I do think Oregon looks to establish Jordan James. They've had pretty much no competition the last couple weeks against Purdue and also against Illinois. So we've not seen the same volume from Jordan James that we saw when they were playing against Ohio State. 23 carries for 115 and a touchdown in that one. And we also see him get a modicum of passing game work. So at 8.3, he's kind of in that Taj Brooks, Darius Taylor range, where it's not quite the RJ Harvey, and it's not a discount either, but it is a fairly priced running back that we expect to get a lot of volume. And going on the road, I think that would make a lot of sense. Quiet the crowd, extend some possessions, that kind of thing. So I like James from Oregon. I don't necessarily think we can pay up for Gabriel here. I don't think this is really the spot to do that. Same way about Tez Johnson. I don't think at 7,700 he's going to have the opportunity to do quite enough to pay that off. I don't mind Evan Stewart at 44. Obviously, much lower threshold that he's got to clear. And then we've seen some flashes from Kenyon Sadiq. Use him a little bit, as gadget plays and end rounds and whatnot. And he's down there at 3,200. But I do think there are not quite as thin of plays that are in that 33 to 37 range that we like a little bit better. So passing mention to Kenyon Sadiq, but really Evan Stewart and Jordan James from the Oregon side and Colston Loveland from the Michigan side is who I'm taking in this one. Overall, don't feel the need to get overly exposed to this one in the same way that I would with Iowa State, Texas Tech, for example.
All right, finishing it up with Indiana versus Michigan State, total of 53.5. Hoosiers are a road favorite, 7.5 points. Kurt Cignetti, he is just not long for the Hoosiers. I would love to see him stay there. He's turned this program completely around. They're 8-0, averaging almost 50 damn points a game. They're getting back their guy, Curtis Rourke, from injury. They did the exactly what I thought they'd do with Taven Jackson against my Huskies, a team that is pretty good against the pass, but horrible against the run. They gave Justice Ellison a ton of rushing work, 29 carries, in fact. This Indiana team will be back to throwing the football around, facing a Spartans team that's actually pretty decent against the run, all things considered. They gave up an early 100-yard game to Treshaun Ward, but and I think Jordan James rushed like for a 150 against them, but everyone else has pretty much struggled, and even my man Caleb Johnson failed to get 100 yards against them. So I think I can pump the brakes a little bit on Ellison after I liked him a lot last week. I do think his price of 5.2 is definitely worth looking at, but I'm not expecting him to get that kind of workload. He's probably going to be back in the 14 to 15 range for carries. Galen Black, Tyson Lawton, Elijah Green, all of those guys still pilfer work. So back to the more committee-esque type thing. And then, of course, with Rourke back, they'll be slinging it around at least 30 to 35 times, which takes away that work as well. Ellison, you're really hoping for some touchdowns at that point. The wide receivers are all pretty cheap. Elijah Surratt is there at 5'6" as the most expensive. Predictably had a rough game against Washington, but has his guy Rourke back. This Indiana offense is very potent. He leads the team in targets with 50, 33 catches for 590 yards and 3 touchdowns. If you do want to go with a Hoosiers receiver, I would rather take the discount on someone like Omar Cooper, sitting there at 4.6, or a Miles Price at 4K. Both of them heavily targeted as well, 30 and 35 respectively. 319 yards for Price and a touchdown, 453 and 4 for Cooper. Cooper as the deep threat, Price more of a short yardage type of guy. As far as Michigan State goes, pretty easy to ignore Aiden Childs. There was a lot of hype coming into the season for him because he has all this unknown upside and had shown flashes and had been so good in high school. It hasn't quite worked out here for Michigan State. I would have rather have seen him go to like Ohio or Bowling Green or somewhere in the MAC where I think he could really be good. So it hasn't worked out. He's only 5K, but tough to really get behind using him. The running back situation, we know K-Ron Lynch-Adams can really pop. Hasn't done so lately because of the erratic play of Childs. Carter's really cheap there. Nate Carter at 4.8. He's getting the bulk of the work and did have a pretty nice game against Michigan, 19 carries for 118 yards. They just couldn't do much of anything else, so Carter just kept getting a lot of the touches, and he just kept banging through. Not so enthralled with either of those guys. Indiana's defense, while their offense has been good, usually you see these teams who score a lot. Defensively, they're pretty lackluster. Indiana's defense is quite good. Not a team you typically want to target against. They're only allowing 14.1 points per game to their opponent. So they are just laying down the wood, as you say. The receivers for Michigan State are cheap. There's 2 main ones, Nick Marsh at 4K and Montori Foster at 3.5. We absolutely unloaded on both against Iowa because of the whole slot receiver thing versus Iowa. Both of them panned out. I do like Foster in this one to a degree for short yardage stuff against Indiana. I don't think Marsh will have as big of impact. He's a lot better as a deeper receiver, taking the top off the defense. I don't think Indiana lets him get behind him, but I do think Foster has a chance for 5, 6, 7 catches, something like that. And at 3.5, that definitely puts him in play. For what it's worth, I would rather play him than the chalkier Chimere DK. So a little bit of Ellison, a little bit of Omar Cooper, a little bit of Montori Foster, but not a game that I'm going to have too terribly much of. I do think it's a betting opportunity for Indiana, -7.5. I think they clear that. And I think the total, as many points as Indiana scores, I think the total is actually leaning towards the under. So that is the slate. We did it. Break down the 12 games. Feel pretty good. A lot of chalk, but again, it's good chalk week. I don't know how to feel about that all the way. I usually like to be on the opposite side of that, but I'm going to be on a lot of popular plays. Let's get into PrizePicks, underdogs, betting stuff, and then we'll circle back around to cores and slate breakers. Real quick, I have 3 PrizePicks that I think the numbers are the same that I am very fond of here. Pulling those up. Trevor Etienne, it was 81.5 rushing yards. I've already hit that a bunch of times on DK Sportsbook as well. DJ Giddens over 100.5 rushing yards. And then Jalen Noel over 79.5 receiving yards. All in on those guys in DFS, all in on them on props. Go figure. Who are some of the PrizePicks or underdogs that you're looking at today?
Yeah, so I'll go Ibuka over 58.5 receiving yards. I think we get there pretty easily. I'll go Braylon Russell over 56.5 rushing yards. Obviously, like him a lot on the DFS side as well. And then let's see, we'll go. We'll go Max Brosmer over 1.5 passing touchdowns. I think he continues to air it out enough to get them in the end zone a few times.
Like it. And 2 underdog plays. Akari Franklin over 4.5 receptions. Trevor Etienne over 0.5 touchdowns. Go figure. All players that we like on DFS. And then a couple of bets. Had some people asking about bet stuff. I have been interacting there. But Kansas State minus 12.5. That's moved to 13 in some places there. So still like it at 13, but we did get it in at 12.5. Ohio State versus Penn State over 45.5. That's moved to 47 in some places. I do still like that over, but anything beyond that, I'm probably off. Arizona plus 6.5. I don't see it with UCF and all this injuries. Illinois plus 3, and then the props go in line with what we've already done. Trevor Etienne 80 plus rushing yards, minus 145 over on DraftKings. Love it. Can't get enough of his props. All right, let's get to the DraftKings core. You go first. Don't want to steal any of your thunder. Then I'm going to give a FanDuel core as well. Then we'll end it with our slate breaker play. And we have really ran through this show. We're only at 90 minutes. Well done.
All right, we'll go Rocco Becht at quarterback, Taj Brooks at running back, and another week of Daniel Jackson at wide receiver.
Daniel Jackson going back. He sold you, won you the money, and you're going back. Love it. I'll go Bryson Daly, obvious, but back in Daly, I'm going to have to find somewhere to be different than the industry. Mario Anderson, and then one of Jalen Noel or Jaden Higgins, possibly both. On FanDuel, Rocco Becht. He's a little more expensive there, but I think you just got to play him. Woody Marks. Running backs versus my Huskies, man. I wish it would have been on the main slate, but we'll get your night slate article there. I believe that's on there. Marks is going to crush us. He's going to rush for like 150 yards. And then Higgins and Noel there as well. All right. That takes us to the final part of the show. I'm tripping. And maybe we should start later all the time. So efficient. Yeah. Give us your slate breaker of the week 10 slate here, and we'll end on that note.
Yeah. So we hit it with LJ Martin. He didn't have quite the 3 touchdowns I was hoping to get him, but he could have if they'd kept him in the game. They just got so far out ahead. He still did pretty well for us though. We are going to stick with the running back position. I hope it isn't overly chalky, but I think industry will get to him. But I'm gonna say this ends up being a 25 carry, 200 yard, 2 touchdown performance for Taj Brooks from Texas Tech, and keeps it close against Iowa State. Not going to come out with a win, but I do think they cover on the capable shoulders of Taj Brooks.
No, I like that because I think the 2 or 3 kind of popular mid-range guys, and then that doesn't leave a lot of room for someone like Brooks, who will probably still see somewhere between 15 to 18%, but nowhere near where he has been. So definitely like that a lot. And just real quick, LJ Martin robbed of possibly 2 other touchdowns with a 1-yard touchdown pass from Retzlaff. And he also, I believe, ran one in, which would have also led to a big showing in the 4-4-4. Lots of weird stuff happened, but it was a good slate. All right. And I have an anytime touchdown with Zakari Franklin plus 135, also sprinkling him on the first touchdown score, which is plus 900. He's scoring. He's going to break through and score a touchdown for us this week. Zakari Franklin, let's do it. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us on Friday night. We'll be back to the normal time of Thursday next week. Also have tomorrow morning injury news, the live before lock Q&A session. That'll just be basically 8 hours from now. Have coffee in hand. And then Sunday night, a final preview of the CBB season. That'll be taking place 10 p.m. PST. Monday night, the slate breakdown for Tuesday. The college basketball season does begin Monday, but we will have a slate breakdown for the larger Tuesday slate. Content galore for college sports. Also, Jake's night slate breakdown will be out at some point tomorrow afternoon. Plenty of interactions in the Discord and on social media. Make sure you guys on the way out, hit the like button on YouTube and hit the repost button on Twitter/X. Appreciate your guys' continued support, and we'll see you next week. I'll see you tomorrow on the CFB Super Show Q&A edition. Let's get those window trips and green screens. Take care.